Welcome to the Unity Forum, a cross-partisan program dedicated to fostering reasoned discourse and a more open society. In each episode, we talk with well-established experts to provide insight on recent events, elevate civil dialogue, and encourage greater mutual understanding on social, economic, and legal issues. Our host is Chris Malone, founder of Fidelum Group and author of the award-winning book, The Human Brand: How We Relate to People, Products, and Companies.
Hello and welcome. I'm Chris Malone and I'll be your host for today's discussion. Thanks for joining us. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Mike Lehman, founder of Layman's Terms, who introduced us to today's guest. Mike works with founders and senior executives on high-stakes communications, things like media interviews, conference panels, and investor conversations, helping leaders clarify their message, anticipate tough questions, and deliver their key points with confidence and precision. His approach draws on deep experience preparing leaders for hundreds of national media appearances and communications work on Capitol Hill. If that sounds useful to you or your organization, you can learn more at ltmediatraining.com. And thanks for indulging me that little plug there for Mike. Next, I'm pleased to welcome our friend, colleague, and Unity Forum program partner, David Nevins. David is co-founder and chairman of the Bridge Alliance Education Fund and publisher of The Fulcrum, a daily news publication. The Fulcrum is a nonprofit, bipartisan digital news platform where insiders and outsiders to politics are informed, meet, talk, and act to repair our democracy to make it live and work in our everyday lives. Welcome, David. What can you tell us about our guest today?
We're honored to have Carlos Curbelo as our guest on the Unity Forum. Carlos is a former member of the United States House of Representatives from 2015 to 2019. And in Congress, he became widely known as a bipartisan voice, something very rare these days, particularly on issues like climate, energy, immigration reform, and other efforts to strengthen constructive, I'll repeat, constructive governing across party lines. He co-founded the bipartisan House Climate Solutions Caucus and was active in coalition building, attempting to find workable solutions in a highly polarized environment. Today, Carlos is the founding principal of Vocero, a bilingual digital media organization, and he is also a political commentator for NBC News, where he offers analysis on national politics and public policy. Before Congress, he served on the Miami-Dade County School Board, bringing public service shaped by diverse communities in that area and real-world challenges facing local and state governments. Welcome, Carlos, to the Unity Forum. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for that kind introduction, David. And Chris, thank you for providing this forum, this platform for those of us who want to explore topics and have good, productive conversations. I really appreciate the opportunity.
We're so pleased to have you. Now, congressional redistricting and gerrymandering has been a hot topic in the news lately, particularly in Florida. And I'm wondering, from your perspective as an elected official, how has gerrymandered redistricting changed the incentives that elected officials have in Florida, particularly around polarization and willingness to compromise? What have you experienced in that regard? Has you seen the climate change relating to how these districts are drawn?
Well, Chris, I'm opposed to all gerrymandering efforts in any state, whether they benefit Republicans or Democrats. I think all of it is bad for our country. And I'll give you a very obvious example as to why, given my experience in the U.S. House of Representatives. Power changes hands in D.C. frequently, more frequently now than 30, 40 years ago. I remind people, Democrats held a House majority for 40 years. Up until 1994, until the 94 election. So, but these days we have some pretty strong swings in who controls Washington. And there are some states, for example, California, even though it's very much a blue state, California has always had a pretty substantive Republican delegation. So when Republicans have been in the majority, there have been people in the chamber that have been able to advocate for California and for the priorities of that state. Take another state like Florida, for example, which has become a red state. Currently, our delegation has 20 Republicans, 8 Democrats. When Democrats have been in the majority, which was the case up until a few years ago in the House, it was important to have Democratic members from Florida who could advocate for the state. I mean, we get natural disasters here. We have all sorts of priorities in this state. So it really maintains a healthy balance, a healthy equilibrium, and it helps people in every state feel like, no matter who's in power, there are going to be people looking out for them, right? And what these gerrymandering efforts are doing is almost completely eliminating that. I mean, when you look at California, it's going to have a negligible number of Republicans. A state like Florida is going to have a negligible number of Democrats. It's going to be a tiny delegation that won't be able to advocate for the state and won't give the state that stability and that strength, regardless of which party controls majorities in the U.S. House of Representatives. Now, that's kind of more of an inside baseball reason, but it's very important, and it's one that I can certainly identify with, given my experience and my relationship with members of Congress during the time I served. But if we zoom out, it's just very unhealthy to have such a small number of swing districts in the country. Because look, at least for those of us who are capitalists, we believe in competition. We believe that competition is what makes everyone better, and competition leads to the best outcomes. And what we're doing with our politics is we're limiting competition as much as possible. Imagine if we did this in the marketplace. We already know some industries that are completely controlled by one or two companies, and that's bad for consumers, right? It drives prices up, it drives quality down. That's what we're going to do with our politics, and I think it's going to be very painful the next few years under the new maps we're seeing across a number of states.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I'm wondering, what are you hearing from voters and people in your community about gerrymandering? I understand that in Florida in 2010, there was kind of a national or a state referendum, and that most voters came out against gerrymandered districts and so forth. But what do you hear from people in the community about this on both ends of the spectrum? How does it impact their trust in their elected officials?
Well, the fact that ballot measure passed in Florida shows where most of the public is. In Florida, to amend our Constitution, you need 60% of the vote. Can't do it with majority plus one. That was changed a couple decades ago. An overwhelming number of Floridians are opposed to all of these gerrymandering efforts. An overwhelming number of Floridians understand that this is bad for the country. So what does this do? It further disenfranchises people. That's a big word. Okay, but what it means is that people feel like they don't count, like they don't matter, like the political system does not represent them. They feel excluded. And the more people feel excluded in a society, the more depressed a society becomes, the more violent a society becomes, the less prosperous a society becomes. Think about it in terms of a neighborhood. If people feel like they're not welcome in a neighborhood, like they don't matter in a neighborhood, they're going to invest less in their homes. It's just going to decrease the quality of life in the neighborhood. That's what we're doing with our politics. And that's why we continue seeing that despite all the noise that the two parties make, and they're very good at making noise, a plurality of voters all across the country are registering independent. They don't want to associate with either party. And I think eventually, Chris, this is going to open up a lane for a third way in our country, which would probably be very healthy and would help stabilize our politics. Now, that's still very difficult because the duopoly does everything in its power to block that third way and to make sure that the barriers to entry for a new party are very high. But eventually something's got to give. And as we get more and more people who just give up on our politics, are dismayed by our politics, I really see a third way as the only way. And we'll see how long that takes. In the meantime, we'll just have people, and we'll probably see it again this fall, people going to the polls and being motivated by anger, being motivated by what they don't like instead of what they would like to be for. And that's a shame.
Right. Voting by what you're against rather than what you're for.
Exactly.
So you've been outspoken on gerrymandering for quite a while. And I'm wondering, from a political perspective and as an experienced representative, do you think are some practical solutions that could be supported on both ends of the spectrum? Is it, commissions or transparency or some kind of guardrails? What do you foresee? Is it possible for there to be middle ground that could be supported by both sides? What's your sense?
Yeah, clearly we need structural reforms. Here in Florida, there was an effort to open up our primaries. Unfortunately, it was a ballot measure, and unfortunately, it got, I think, 58% of the vote, needed 60. Both parties, Republicans and Democrats, united to fight the ballot measure. Otherwise, it would have won easily. And unfortunately, the campaign in favor of it was barely funded at all. So but that's the type of initiative we need. And you see this working in states like Maine and Alaska, Washington State, even in California. I mean, the only reason sometimes centrist Republicans get elected in some districts in California is because they have this jungle primary where the most extremist candidates are not rewarded. They actually end up losing out. So we definitely need those kinds of structural reforms, and hopefully this new wave of gerrymandering, this blatant, extraordinary gerrymandering. We used to do it every 10 years. Now we're doing it whenever we feel like it. Hopefully this will motivate people to take control of this democracy and say, we got to put an end to this. 65, 70, 75% of the public is being shut out. We're getting outcomes that 70% of Americans disagree with. That's not okay. I mean, we definitely, our founders created a system where minorities could be respected, but it doesn't mean that minorities should be imposing their will on the rest of the country. So, this 15% of Republicans and 15% of Democrats, or 15% of the country who are hardcore radical Republicans and 15% who are hardcore radical Democrats, determining the type of government that the rest of us get, that's just fundamentally unfair. But we have to do something about it.
Right.
It's not going to fix itself, and the people who have the power aren't going to just give it away. People have to take action, and I hope that in our state here in Florida, in California, in Virginia, where there was a failed redistricting effort, average citizens will sign petitions and organize and say, enough of this. Let's have fair districts. Let's give people from both parties a fair shot at getting elected, and we will choose the best candidate. Seems pretty simple to me.
Yeah. Do you think that state Supreme Courts hold any hope for this, particularly in Florida? In the state of Pennsylvania, where I lived, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ultimately determined a few years ago that gerrymandering was against the Constitution of the state of Pennsylvania. And so it's kind of secured in that regard. I wonder, what is your view of that matter in Florida? Do you see the state Supreme Court as possibly stepping in here, or is it likely to go the way that other courts have gone?
We'll see. The districts were challenged as we could have expected. And there's clear language in the Florida Constitution outlawing the drawing of districts with political motivations, right? So they could. Now, it's true that there have been a number of Supreme Court rulings now that make the situation a lot cloudier and murkier than it would have been otherwise. And if I had to bet, I think that this Florida Supreme Court, where almost all of the justices have now been appointed by the sitting governor, who was the main proponent of this gerrymandering effort. If I had to bet, I think they're going to uphold the new map, but they certainly have the hook in the Constitution to overturn it or to strike it down if they wanted to. We'll see what they decide. But the bottom line, regardless of what they decide, is that it's clear that we need new initiatives to solve for this growing problem in our democracy, which is politicians choosing their voters instead of voters choosing their politicians.
Well put. Well put. Now let's shift our attention to immigration. You are the son of parents who immigrated to the United States from Cuba. If you were writing kind of immigration reform policy, right now, what do you see as kind of an approach that could gain support and be practically effective? You might have a, personal experience with your family that relates to this. I'm very interested in your perspective on that.
So, Chris, obviously, I embrace the idea of America as a country of immigrants. It is, even if you don't embrace the idea, it's still a fact, right? Everyone here, unless you're Native American, everyone here came from somewhere else, right? And that's part of the secret sauce here. That's why we have become such a great nation, the greatest in the history of the world, as far as I'm concerned. However, I also believe in law and order, and I think that immigration should be orderly, it should be legal, it should be predictable, it should be managed so that it helps advance our economic interests. Every country has different needs in their economies, certain labor shortages, and our immigration system should be compatible with those needs. We've really not been good at organizing our immigration system so that it complements our economy. Look, this is the perfect time to reform our country's immigration laws. To the administration's credit, the southwest border is under control. It is no longer a chaotic mess the way it was under the previous administration. It doesn't matter how you feel about immigration. No one should be in favor of anyone coming through the border at any time, no questions asked. That's just not a rational policy, and it's not a sustainable policy for any country. So this administration has managed to address border security in a meaningful and effective way. And I think even if you're a Democrat, you should be able to recognize that, because it's true. Now, the other half of immigration is what they've gotten wrong. There are a lot of people in this country who have been doing difficult jobs for a long time. It is true that they do not have legal status. They came to the country illegally, or maybe they came legally and overstayed their visa. Bottom line is they are not authorized immigrants. However, they are people who have been contributing to the country. Think about the jobs that a lot of these people do. I see them here in Miami every day. They take care of children who would otherwise be alone. They take care of elderly people who would otherwise be alone, or maybe not even alive because there was no one to care for them. They do a lot of janitorial work. They work at restaurants. I mean, these are people, by and large, working for low wages to improve the quality of life for American citizens. Why are we going to throw them out of the country? Why not afford them the opportunity to earn legal status in the country? It doesn't even have to be a path to citizenship, okay? I think that's ideal, because you want to give anyone who lives in a country the opportunity to reach the highest level. But let's say that there's no political agreement for that. I assure you that 9.9 out of 10 undocumented immigrants would be thrilled if we told them that they could earn legal status in the country, meaning that they could live knowing that they weren't going to be deported and that they weren't going to be removed from their family units or whatever it is. This is the time to do it. This is the time to do it. It'd be good for the economy. It would lower inflation. It would increase government revenues, and God knows we need it because our national debt just keeps growing and growing and growing. So this is the time to do it.
I got to ask you though, Carlos, we got to address the elephant in the room. As it relates to controlling and closing the southwest border, do the means justify the ends? In order to do that, should we be throwing out our Constitution, system of justice, and due process? Shouldn't we be talking about that as well?
That's we could do a whole show on that topic.
Right.
I'm all for due process rights. Without a doubt, our legal immigration system and a lot of these due process rights were being exploited by people. Okay, the intention of our immigration laws was to offer asylum to people fleeing political persecution in their countries. I'm a Cuban American. I have a lot of hope for the future of Cuba, but that's another topic
Right,
too.
right.
There were many Cubans coming to the United States claiming asylum. They were granted asylum. For Cubans, it was very easy it was almost automatic.
Mm-hmm.
And then they were returning to Cuba.
And why? I'm curious why.
Because they could.
I see.
They wanted to visit their relatives. And I understand all that, but don't come to the United States and claim that you're fleeing persecution and then 2 years later return to your country. You just did something dishonest.
I see.
You exploited and abused our laws. So, and I bring up Cubans just to be fair and to show you that even people who I identify with very closely, I was not okay with the status quo on immigration. And I think we can be honest and say that most of the people who over the decades have shown up at the southwest border have done so for economic reasons. They want to come to this country to work and to get ahead, and I understand them. But that's not what they were saying when they were interviewed. They were saying that because they were coached by the coyotes and by all the criminal organizations that traffic these people, this is what you have to say. And if you say this, they have to give you guarantee you an asylum hearing, and you can go into the country, and what you do after that is up to you. That system, I don't think anyone should be okay with that.
Yeah. Now, so what do you think are some practical reforms? Let's get to that part. I totally understand where you're coming from on that. I think it makes good sense. But what do you think are the solutions in that regard?
Well, look, I think a lot of what this administration has done administratively to close those loopholes it makes sense. I mean, this is the other issue. A lot of people say, well, this Remain in Mexico policy is so cruel. Well, if let's say you claim that you're fleeing persecution in Honduras and you're in Mexico, why do you have to come to the United States? You're no longer in danger, right? You have managed to escape the country that was persecuting you. And this is the problem, that what people, especially in Latin America, are really fleeing is poverty. And what are the solutions? I mean, they're extremely complex. If we're talking about the complete solution is to help our neighbors provide economies where people can thrive and flourish. And by the way, we have a role in that because we can strengthen trade relationships with these countries. We can, it's a great opportunity. A lot of people complain, understandably, about our dependence on China. Wonderful. Let's bring some of this manufacturing to the Americas. And then we will solve both our immigration issues and our trade issues, because we'll have access to goods that are a lot closer, so transportation costs will go down. Sure, labor might go up a little bit because the Chinese labor standards are basically non-existent, and even in Latin America, there are higher labor standards and environmental standards than in China. But that's the solution, right? And we kind of got a glimpse of what that looks like through the U.S. Colombia relationship. The United States invested billions over decades in Plan Colombia, a program to stabilize the country. There was obviously a guerrilla there that was persecuting people and destabilizing the government. We helped the Colombian government get the guerrilla under control, and then we signed a free trade agreement with Colombia, and Colombia became a country that offered opportunity and hope to its citizens. So they, guess what? Fewer of them wanted to come to the United States illegally, and that's wonderful because now we've created a commercial partner for our country and an ally that can help us to fight drug traffickers and organized crime and not that we have any military threats in this region, but a potential ally if there were a military conflict in the future. So that's the solution. Now that takes a lot of time, it takes investment, and most importantly, it takes will, and it takes leaders that are willing to be honest with the public and say, if we want to fix this immigration problem, it's going to take a decade, and we're going to have to make a serious investment. And at the end of that decade, everyone will be very happy. But in the meantime, we have to be patient. But look, I just think it was so unfortunate that the Biden administration was so negligent about what was happening at the southwest border, because it really turned public opinion against immigrants in a lot of ways. But the irony is the Trump administration, due to its overreach on interior enforcement, now public opinion has turned against them, and people rightfully believe that we're being unfair and way too harsh in the way we're treating immigrants, especially those who are making contributions here. So this is a problem, right? And gerrymandering, which we were talking about before, is just going to make it all worse, because it's going to continue feeding those two extremes. And what we need is balanced, fair policies that treat immigrants fairly, demand that our country's laws be respected, that people come to this country in an orderly and legal way, and gives people the opportunity to thrive here and to contribute to our diversity, to everything that has made us the greatest nation in the world.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing that from a big picture standpoint, it's not just happening in the United States, right? That over the last 15 years, my understanding is that 120 million people worldwide have been forcibly displaced through conflicts and other things, whether it's a Ukraine or Afghanistan or Syria or Palestine or you name it, basically. And so all of this pushes people in different directions. And we're facing these issues in other parts of the world as well, Western Europe and so forth. And that migration, where people that we're unfamiliar with come in, it's human nature, unfortunately, to be susceptible to the suggestion that people who are different from us pose a threat. And I think that's the unfortunate part, is that as you said from the beginning, we are a nation of immigrants, and that is something that we treasure, I think. So let's just not lose sight of that. But we could talk, as you have said, we could talk about immigration all day. And I do want to get to climate change as well, which I know you've got a lot of point of view on. So let's shift our discussion to that. Florida is ground zero in climate change, whether it's sea level, storms, insurance stress. What are you seeing there? And what do you think would be some good cross-partisan policies around climate change?
So here's another issue that's become needlessly politicized. There was a time in this country where everyone agreed that we needed to do our best to protect the environment. It's just like, this is where we live. This is our planet. I think Floridians generally have a fairly developed environmental conscience. Most of us live near the ocean. near the Everglades. In my case, I live between the ocean and the Everglades. This is a state, for example, where there's pretty reflexive opposition to offshore drilling, even by hardcore Republicans, because they don't want anything that would threaten a single beach or even the view from the beach, right? So we really do need to do more as a state to reduce pollution. And, I could say fight climate change, but again, that term has become so politicized and identified with liberal suite of solutions that I think we just got to be even more speak even more plainly and say we have to fight pollution. So we know that we're polluting the atmosphere with greenhouse gases. We know that these greenhouse gases are having an impact on the climate. Do greenhouse gases cause hurricanes? No, we have had hurricanes in this peninsula for at least 300 years. Spanish first documented that when they got here. Are the greenhouse gases making the storms stronger? Are they making the flooding worse because sea levels are higher now? 100%. Are these same shifting weather patterns and these same factors hurting farmers in other parts of the country? Absolutely. Are they threatening the wine industry on the West Coast? Absolutely. Are they causing us Floridians to pay very high insurance rates? Clearly. The numbers are staggering. People talk about home affordability, and they tend to focus on the cost of buying a property. That's only part of the problem. The cost of carrying the property is actually a bigger challenge, because that's really what determines whether the person can buy it or not, right? Whether they can make those monthly payments, principal, interest, tax, and insurance. And we're at a point in Florida now where the insurance for a lot of homes is costlier than the property taxes. So this is what I'm focused on these days when working on this issue of the environment. I think that the environmental movement, those who care about climate change, have to understand that the movement now has to go mainstream and has to appeal to, if not the entire public, 80% of the public. And how do we do that? Well, I think most people would be motivated by the idea that it'd be great if we could all pay less in insurance premiums. It would be great if our children could afford to buy a home instead of having to move in with their parents or their grandparents. So these are the aspects of this challenge that we need to focus on, and not lecture and try to shame people, but help them understand how all these dots are connected. And we really need to make this issue relatable to more people. And the more we do that, the more progress we'll make. And even though I think the president, of course, has just used language that's very damaging to this, and I feel has been dishonest, I do know that there's a bipartisan coalition in Congress that understands the importance of energy diversity, of energy security, affordability, that cares about protecting the environment. When I was in Congress, I dedicated a lot of time to getting Republicans to a better place. For a long time, Republicans were either expected to deny that this issue existed, or just, to even worse, to not care about it.
Well, thank you for your work in helping getting that started. And to your earlier point about this really needs to go mainstream, I wonder whether an issue like growing electricity demand and AI data centers might be the kind of issue that could appeal broadly. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, the oil issue due to the Iran war is completely separate from the challenge we already had, which is growing power demand.
Right.
For a long time in our country, power demand was flat, and it was very easy to manage the grid because there was really no stress on it. But as we have electrified, as both the first Trump administration, the Biden administration, and this Trump administration have worked to get more manufacturing plants in the United States, as data centers come online and AI becomes ubiquitous, right? I think everyone's at least given it a try. All of that increases the demand on the grid, and people all over the country are paying more in their power bills. So what a great reason to promote the type of energy that can get on the grid fastest and the less costly, which right now happens to be, without the help of any tax subsidies, wind and solar. Wind and solar are the fastest to market. You can get a solar power plant up in about 18 months. Okay, wind I think is similar, and they're the cheapest. And now with battery, they can compete in terms of reliability with natural gas. So yeah, this idea. Look, I'm prone to do this because I like to be fair. The Biden administration arbitrarily decided to suspend liquid natural gas exports in the United States because they wanted to send a message to their political base. There's no benefit to the environment from suspending LNG exports. On the contrary, we produce LNG in this country more efficiently and cleaner than most countries. So we should be promoting American LNG. That was a big mistake. This administration, the Trump administration, has attacked both wind and solar and has attempted to arbitrarily shut down offshore wind projects. The courts have prevented that, but the administration did take those actions, and they did delay some of these projects. The American people are the losers of those types of arbitrary policies. We're living at a time where we really do need all of the above. Okay.
Yeah.
And the left has to understand that, yes, we're in the midst of a clean energy transition. It's a transition. It's not going to change from one day to the next. Oil and natural gas are going to be a big part of our economy for the foreseeable future. It's just, there's no other way about it. And then, people on the Republican side need to accept the transition. We need to do better by the environment, and we need to listen, especially to younger Americans who demand cleaner energy and want to a product that they feel more comfortable using, right? So anyway, I guess that's what this program is all about.
Yeah.
Trying to find that sweet.
Well, I think it's actually a great segue into, I really want to get at least one question in from listeners. And this notion of, administrations on both sides of the spectrum have been making choices that aren't necessarily in everybody's best interest. And so we have a question, for example, from Jim Reeser. So, Carlos, is it your contention that the center is where to govern from? And is that how we get to legislation that benefits every average American? Is that a plausible, possibility? Is that what you're suggesting? What do you think on Jim's question?
It's not my contention. It's the contention of our founders. Everything they did was based on compromising. They birthed this nation as a result of a number of compromises, right? So if we think this is the greatest nation in the world, and if we admire the founders as much as most Americans claim to, why don't we emulate them? Why don't we follow their example and compromise in a way that all of our country feels included? I maybe didn't get everything I want, but I got something and they got something, and now we can all move forward. So 100%. This is not, I didn't invent this. I'm just copying brilliant people.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and it's a great segue into our last question, is kind of thoughts of hope and how we navigate this future. And I think to your point, policies that are at one end of the spectrum or another that serve only the interest of a relatively small minority are not going to be sustainable and are going to create a lot of kind of uncertainty and upheaval and instability, essentially. Whereas if we can find that middle ground, maybe not everybody gets what they want, but most people get, what we need, to quote a song, if you will. But what are your closing thoughts for our listeners on how we navigate the future, given your experience both in Washington and Florida?
Well, I think I'd like to close by saying that we can all wish that things were better in our country, but that's not going to be enough. We need to act if we want to make things better in our country. And whether that means you're reaching out to an elected official and asking them to take not even so much a different position, but a different approach to public service. If you are going to sign a petition to open up primaries in your state or adopt ranked choice voting or some of these other structural reforms that could yield better outcomes, maybe you're going to run for office for your city council, your town council, whatever it is. That's how we're going to make things better. It's not going to magically get better. The people who are in control today, and I'm not talking about the current administration, I'm talking about all of the people all over the country who control the levers of power. They're not just going to turn those levers of power over. We have to compete with them, and we have to mobilize the people we know make up the majority in this country. Most Americans want this system to work differently. They want people to collaborate. They want people to compromise. They want people to sit at the table respectfully, maybe passionately debate their views, but reach a consensus that includes everyone. We need to make that happen. Thoughts and prayers aren't going to make it happen.
No, totally agree. As I've expressed on this program once before, everything in our world seems to work better when we look out for and take care of one another. And that doesn't mean to recklessly disregard our responsibilities or tip the balance, but generally willing to compromise is always the best way to sustain things. So Carlos, thank you so much for an insightful and thought-provoking conversation. It's a real pleasure talking with you. I'd like to thank our listeners today as well for your time and your thoughtful questions. And be sure to join us for another episode of the Unity Forum. Until then, have a great rest of your day. Take care, everyone.